of the 2025 Speed Chess Championship semifinals. Takes a swig of water. Donnie would always say that you know a player is happy with their position when they take that drink, but Denis is doing the same. I think they're just thirsty this time around. So we have an English opening, 4 knights. Denis plays g3. Magnus has played this so many times from the white side. So both of these players very experienced in these positions. And we see the bishop for Denis on g2. It's on the long diagonal. You want to make use of it. He plays e3 here, and that indicates that he wants to play d4. So don't play this move bishop e6. That would be a huge blunder. You're walking into d4 and then d5 with a fork. That would be very bad. So Magnus, he learns from all of the great contemporaries. In the first game, Denis brought his bishop back quickly to a7. He didn't want d4 to happen with the tempo, so bishop a7 seems to be the retreating square if d4 is played right now. So Denis is thinking if this were a game of 1-minute chess, he would have just played d4 already, I believe, but perhaps he'll go for a different route. No, he does in fact play d4, not playing in a cagey style, playing a very direct approach, gaining space in the center. Magnus taking his time. So both players, I think that they're just, each and every game, they're trying to understand the dynamics of play, the nuances, because it may look like a position you've studied before, but perhaps the bishop is better placed on b6 rather than a7. These are the little things that make up great players. And rook e8 played, given a question mark, bishop g5, the position calls for a pin of this knight. And I think the point, everyone, is that h6, bishop h4 is the plan. You actually can't break the pin with pawn to g5 because there will be a knight sack and a vicious attack against the black king. So Denis, I mean, he's got a big opportunity right now. Bishop g5, go for a piece sacrifice. What's he risking there? I mean, it just feels like it's going to be fun at the very least. He plays bishop e3. Speaking of risk-free chess, bishop e3 is that type of move. He doesn't want to calculate a piece sacrifice, but it was there. It was in the air. And for Denis, I mean, maybe it's worth just exploring that just a little bit, because I think Denis might regret that slip. I mean, I don't want to be harsh, but if we can sort of analyze that moment, like he could have pinned that knight, and yes, the piece would have been given up, but just to show you that bishop g5, h6, yes, the bishop slides back, and g5 traps that bishop. That's what always happens when you're fianchetto. Black can do this. But after the trade of pieces here, like, this is really dangerous. That's a pin that's not going anywhere. The king is open. If you take on d4 with the bishop, then you lose this piece on c6. The bishop is hanging, so you actually can't really effectively take this pawn on d4. So we'll go back to the game, but I think that that was looking really, really dangerous because the black king was going to be ripped open, and instead we have a much calmer approach. We're back to the live board. We see that now Magnus doesn't have to worry about that pin. He didn't like where his knight was placed. He would prefer to go to f5, hitting this bishop on e3, again applying pressure on this pawn on d4, and Denis says, I see what you're doing. I'll play knight to h4. I just talked about g5. Even winning a piece wasn't the type of move you want to play. So at the moment, I think Magnus is saying, that's too much. Why expose my king to such serious problems when I can play a safe move like c6, maybe play d5 in the near future, shutting down this bishop on g2. It was once a powerful piece. Now it's kind of a little stuck. d5 allows black to take on e3 at some moment. So yeah, white just allows black to press forward. Magnus is clearly better now because white's pieces are passive and or awkward. The knight on h4, it's really just trying to stop black from putting a piece on f5. It's not an attacking piece. On the queen side here, this pawn on c4 is now directly threatened. You do not want to take on d5 and give yourself an isolated pawn. Jose Raul Capablanca would look at this position from the black side and say, let's just sign those score sheets. I'm going to take this one home. And we see that Denis says not one knight, but both knights in the rim are they dim? Are they grim? I don't really know what to make of them right now. Maybe this knight can go to c5, and that perhaps encourages or strongly suggests that this bishop has to come off the board. White will get the bishop pair on an opening board, but for the meantime, we see the bishop does attack the white queen. Slide out the way. Don't blunder that piece. That would be a huge mistake. Queen c1. If you're Magnus, look out for a sack on h6. I don't believe it works here. Magnus doesn't believe it works here. Denis is just trying to coordinate his pieces as best as possible. Rook to e1. There is only one fully open file. That's that e file here. So you should, in fact, place this rook here. But if the bishop moves, the d4 pawn is loose. So it's not easy to figure out how to make these trades work. And for Magnus, huge lead on the clock right now. We see 3 minutes, 30 seconds for him, 2:17 for Denis. Bishop e4, I really like those type of moves because you're trying to exchange that fianchetto bishop. The fianchetto piece is such an important defender of the white king. So f3 played, making this bishop look a bit silly. I mean, that bishop is staring into a brick wall, its own pawn on f3, but what he can do is now move his bishop back along this dark square diagonal, and in doing so, the bishop keeps the center defended. It allows white to trade rooks, and it means that maybe the worst will be behind Denis because he has finally activated his knight over there on the queen side. He has gained much needed space, and now Magnus takes a page out of Denis's book. He shuts down his own bishop, but he wanted to kick the knight out of c5. c4 is captured here. White can capture back. You take with the pawn, because with the queen, there would have been this b5 move anyway. But I love the way Magnus has handled this, because now he can actually, in fact, take this knight on c5 and leave white with, oh, he takes on c4. That move surprised me. I actually thought he was going to play pawn to b4, but he's instead going for activity. What he could have done was leave white saddle with two isolated c-pawns, those double pawns there. Instead, he goes for the immediate activity. The rook was challenging the bishop. Behind is that light square bishop. So I really like this as well. A lead on the clock. I think the one downside, I would say, is that when you're well ahead on time like this, without so many pieces on the board, the moves start to get perhaps a bit easier for Denis. And rook c2 played, okay, a direct shot against the white. That queen should slide over 2 squares to the left. That way it keeps the a2 pawn defended. Okay, it goes to b3, similarly defending that a2 pawn. I thought the queen on a4 was a little bit more active. The queen on b3 is trying to use an open file. And don't be surprised if Denis goes for queen to b6 at some moment. I wouldn't do that right now because Magnus's last move, I think he's strongly hinting that his queen wants to join the party and go for an attack. But speaking of attack, the a6 pawn is vulnerable. Bishop f1. Rewriting the bishop, it hits that a6 pawn. Now with queen to d2, which was one of Magnus' ideas, rook e2. That rook can safely slide forward, trade those rooks. Actually trading pieces, I know I talk about how Denis likes the endgame, but trading pieces is just objectively good for white here because you have a bishop pair and those targets on the queen side. Knights are notoriously bad at defending both sides of the board. They're slow-moving pieces. So if Denis can somehow trade off the rooks or trade off the queens without giving away material, he would be a very, very happy chess player. So this scene is great. I mean, look at the colors there. Look like I'm going down Rainbow Road and just trying to win this race to the end. But I think these players right now, they're not focused on the colors except for the black and white pieces right now and trying to figure out what the next best move is. And you see Denis, the time there, as going near to a minute. And for Magnus, knight d5, the only move that gives him an advantage. With king g2 a mistake, it's not actually like super obvious that knight d5 is that problematic for white. It's just a good square to be on, but rook c3, queen f6, now f3 is super vulnerable. So knight on d5 is a healthy square in the center, but it also gives black key access points. Here comes rook c3. I mean, this is getting very bad very quickly. You see Denis, he puts his hand up in frustration. He just completely missed that this idea was in the air. And f3 now, the move he played so long ago, it's protected by a king. You don't want to use your king as a defender with so many pieces on the board. It's the worst defender to have because if it's checked, it kind of has to move. If 2 pieces attack 1 square, well, that's a problem. So queen f6, I think that Denis will have to push his pawn to f4 after queen to f6. And that opens up the light square diagonal. You don't really want to push pawns in front of your own king. It gives key points of access to your opponent. It makes it easier to attack. Queen f6 played, f4 should be the quick response. I don't really see another move for Denis. And he plays it, but now there are all sorts of ideas. Bishop d3 is just one of them. The rook's under attack. You can trade bishops behind it. Maybe the rook slides bishop e4 check is something to consider as well. And oh, queen g6, the blue arrow, it's saying that that is the only move that keeps the advantage as significant as it currently is. Trading bishops, apparently not enough, even though that does look really good for black with a knight on a light square and white lacking a piece that can knock it off it. And here queen g6 says, okay, we can trade those light square bishops, but on my terms, and it threatens up knight takes f4 check. So queen to g6, I mean, that's such a nice move, but Magnus, he's frustrated. He looks like somebody who is trying to create a symphony there with that hand gesture, but he trades bishops on f1, and the direct approach was not the correct one. Queen g6, not an easy move to play, and you can tell, he knows that he's been better. He has the upper hand, but actually converting on these advantages is really difficult, especially when you play someone like like Denis, because small advantages often are not enough. And king on f1, it looks like it can be quite exposed, but what? You play your queen to f5? Okay, so what? The king can go back to g2 and maybe tuck itself on h2. There aren't so many targets to work with. So rook f3 played, offering an exchange of queens that, wow, he takes with a pawn on f6. That's how much Magnus likes his knight on d5, and he wants to restrict the white rook. He takes with a pawn. Pawn structure, overrated. Danya would say exactly that in this endgame. Rook d4, protecting a4. Watch out at some point. Like rook takes d5 is not working anytime soon, really, but then the c-pawn can go to the other side. So just look out for that kind of thing. And the reason why Magnus took on f6 with the pawn or the knight was he didn't want to allow that rook to d6. So the knight goes to e3. Okay, the king can choose where it goes. I think e2 looks the most natural to me. He goes to f2, which is approved. The evaluation bar stays right in the center because a5 is actually hanging. So he's giving up g3 to go for a5, and rook d8 is the move. When he plays it, I mean, Denis Lazavik he continues to amaze me and his opponents because I thought that he would just defend the a4 pawn to win a5. No, he actually wants to get activity here, and he can go for the c pawn, and maybe he should throw in a check on g8 first. Bishop d2, I mean, that is the calmest move in the position. He wants g4, f5. He wants to go after this black king. So all of a sudden, it's Magnus who needs to be on the defensive. And objectively, Magnus is doing fine. Maybe he needs to use that a pawn as a distraction at some point soon. But like this king is boxed in. If this bishop actually gets out somehow into d6, there could be some issues. But if c5 falls here, and it has, I think now it's Denis just trying to make sure he has enough for equality. He actually trades rooks. That's counterintuitive. When you're down material, you often do not want to be the side trading. But he's suggesting that this h6 pawn is a permanent weakness. Not enough material on the board. The black king can't get around quickly enough. And the c pawn alone is maybe not going to do it because the white king steps forward to e4, winning king of the hill, but drawing this game. And wow, capturing on h5, that's a brave decision. But he's just going back and forth, defending the pawn. Bishop d2 comes with a check. It forces the black king back. King f3 now, king e4 is the idea, going after this black knight. And king e4, though, c3 is just in time here. So king e2, the correct choice. I mean, Denis brings his king back rather than forward. How tempted would we have all been? I was tempted to move forward. And no, he decides to bring his king around, go after this c4 pawn. All the pieces are getting traded off, and peace will be had. I mean, if this game does not result in a draw, something has gone terribly wrong with their connection or just with their looking at the timer. But right now, as soon as the pawn goes to f4, the bishop will take it. So, well, okay, you have to be careful. Knights are tricky pieces, but what Denis needs to do is not trade his bishop for the knight, not allow a fork, and that's why he's going his king to e2. If his king and bishop are in opposite colors, it's impossible to fork them. Right? A knight attacks the same color complex. A knight on the light squares attacks dark squares. And here, you cannot, you know, you're thinking about taking this knight, but don't go for it. Take now. You can take now, and then king f2. You create opposition, you make the draw. So Denis timed everything perfectly. He is able to escape this one with a draw, and we see 2.5, 1.5 as the first half of the 5+1 comes to a close. The players get a much-deserved round of applause, but they also get a much-deserved break. And Magnus immediately goes to analyzing that game, and he's shaking his head because at some point it was -2. But Denis, I mean, he should be happy he escaped in that one, but he's had some good opportunities that he has let slip. And Magnus, I mean, he shakes his head because he always wants perfection out of himself. That's what makes him the GOAT. It's what makes him so strong. And there, the players are getting cheered on as they are stepping aside from the playing area. They're going to get some rest, maybe get some hydration, because you know the London weather can be rainy outside, but it's important that in these heated moments you get, oh my goodness, look at that. That's Denis in the middle of his match signing things.